Welcome to Curtain Call, the show where we go behind the curtain with the stars of the culture wars. I'm your host, Alexandra Marshall, and today we are joined by Warren Mundine. Warren, thank you for joining us today on Curtain Call. It's lovely that you can be here with us today.
It's my pleasure. It's really great to catch up with you again.
Yes, well, here on Curtain Call, we go behind the scenes with the stars of the culture wars, and you in particular have been a great culture warrior for Australian politics. I was doing a bit of light stalking of you before our interview, and I came across a quote in the Australian, I hope it's correct, where you were quoted as saying, "I'm not going to die, I've got too much work to do." And first of all, is that true?
Yes, it is. It actually is true. Yeah, I'm gonna have to live to be about 200. Yeah.
The idea of never giving up is a really a great way to go through life. But just for our viewers who might not know, this is my light stalking sheet, so I'm going to read it to make sure I get your history right because it is extensive. You were the national president of the Labor Party, and you're now joined to the Liberal Party. You were CEO of the Native Title Service, deputy mayor of Dubbo, senior vice president of the Australian Government National Indigenous Council. I hope I got that one right. And director of the Australian Uranium Association, which I think we'll have a little chat about in a minute. You also run your online video series, Mundine's Truth Talking, which everyone should check out. And you're an author of 2 books, Speaking My Mind and In Black and White. So before we get started, I know some people who are in the culture wars feel as if either their gender or their ethnicity drives their politics and has sort of carved out their path for you. Do you feel that your Irishness has really driven your politics forward, given how much time you spend in the Labor Party?
Well, yeah, that's right. It's I'm captured by my genes. From my mother's side, the Irish comes from, and we were a very pro-nationalist and strong, working class people. And go back to my grandfather and my Irish side, John O'Donovan and the group. They were they come out to Australia to escape the British, and they've been very strong Republicans and very strong nationalists. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've got one Irish person in my family who was mayor of Mudgee, Catherine, which I'm not really allowed to mention very often, but I know the Irish connection to the Labor Party is very strong. So it's it's not actually that unusual to find people on the Liberal or on Conservative and Libertarian politics who did begin their life in the Labor Party. What was it like to spend so long in Labor and then decide to switch to Conservative government? Was it a choice you made recently, like in a short period of time, or were you sort of gradually rolling toward it?
Well, what's that old saying? When you're young, you're a socialist, and as you get older, you become more conservative. Well, look, part of that's right with me. I was brought up in a very typical Irish Republican. Catholics, where they were very strong Catholics, and that my grandparents and my grandparents' mother and that used to herd us off to church every Sunday, and we all went to Catholic schools. So we're very strong in that regard. I've always been also very strong in regard to a liberal democracy and business and commercial and private sector stuff. So I was very much a Hawke Keating type Labor person, and I believe that the Labor Party has changed in the last 15 years. changed radically and has moved to the left and forgotten the working class people. And that's why you're getting figures like 53%, 56% of blue-collar workers now actually voting Liberal.
Yeah, well, you're not alone in that thought at all. I feel more and more we keep describing Australia at the moment as if we're trapped in a culture war. And part of that seems to be that the Labor Party has forgotten the working class, and increasingly the Liberal Party are forgetting the middle class. And there seems to be this chase toward radical politics that we're importing from America and from Europe, leaving a large amount of Australians in the middle wondering what is going on. As someone who's so invested in politics like yourself, do you worry that we might be facing a political upheaval in Australia, or at least some a period of time where our politics is going to be quite confused, where parties might move around, or where we might see some drastic changing of policies and things like that happening soon?
Oh, look, I have no doubt about that. It's, you look what's happening in America. We seem to, within fashion and within a lot of other things, people used to say we're about 10 years behind the United States. And in this case, I'm hoping that may be true, but also not true, that we don't actually follow the vitriolic divide that's in the United States. And, there's no sort of middle ground now. Trump was the result of the disenfranchising of middle America and the working class. They felt left really behind, and you had this elite inner city politics, which was driving the agenda at the higher echelons of public life, in politics, and you're seeing this stuff here in Australia too. We're a very small minority, like in the inner cities, have captured so much of the Labor Party, and you see the battle now between Fitzgibbons and Albanese, and I'm glad he stood up, because working class people, the middle class people really need a voice at the moment, because the Liberal Party was the voice of small business, the voice of that middle class people. And even now you're seeing the struggle within that between the left and the right within the Liberal Party as well. And so we're moving into very dangerous times.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And a lot of the problems that are joined up in this Liberal Party, Labor Party problem is we used to have quite a good balance between the two parties, where one would get in power, drive some narratives forward, then they'd switch, and then the ones that were left behind would then catch up with the next party that came in. And now we seem to have two parties driven by fringe politics as far as the voting base is concerned. And one of those...
Yeah, that's pretty true.
Yeah, and it's a shame, because one of the biggest topics that's involved in this is, of course, the renewables topic and our energy future. And as someone who's spent so much time in the mining industry, and in particular uranium, as we broached on before, the most important thing for a country facing geopolitical conflict, which the world may very well be facing soon, there's a lot of problems outside Australia's shores to worry about, is energy security. If your country is not energy secure and can't power itself, then you can't survive any sort of conflict, regardless if it's on your country or outside. Are you worried that we've sold, or both parties are selling, our entire energy future to China and their renewables program, instead of focusing on the many gifts of energy that Australia has, including uranium, which could power Australia for the rest of the Earth's entire lifespan?
Well, there's no doubt that we are moving into a very unstable global world, because you're just seeing the challenges that are happening between China, the rise of China, which up until recently people were very happy with, because we believe that getting China into the international stage, that will quieten them down about having this global communist, because communism is about globalism. They're trying to take over other countries and places, and we saw that with the Soviet Union for about 70 years. With China, we were hoping that through their cultural background, because China, if you look at their history, they were never an expanding nation. They thought they were the middle heaven, between heaven and earth, and all the rest of us were barbarians, so they didn't want to mix with us. And they just the only time you saw China expand out was through the Mongols. when Genghis Khan and that come into China and then went across into Europe. That was the only time they really had an expansion plan. The rest
He
of
was
the time,
very pro-expansionism. He was very, very pro-expansionism, Genghis Khan. He went out. He expanded as far as you possibly expand.
Oh, yes, he was. Yeah, that's right. And so it was only under that Mongol rule, that short period of time in any global terms of about 400 or 500 years. The other couple of thousand years, they sort of locked themselves out from the world because they thought they were so much higher and better off and highly intelligent people, and the rest were all barbarians. Now, and so we thought that would have this effect on them. But what we're seeing with this, especially with this president, is the shift from the Deng principles and actually moving back to those old Maoist type approach to things, but a Maoist approach with economic power, which the Soviet Union never had. And so we're facing a different animal than the old Soviet Union. We're facing a large communistic nation who are going back into that old tendency of communism, but at the same time being a very powerful economic power.
Yes, well, some people don't realise that Xi Jinping, he might be quite sort of unassuming man, but he is a firm Stalinist, and he has no intention of westernising China because he believes that the westernisation of Russia resulted in the fall of the USSR. So any business people who think he's going to start playing nice with their prospects is kidding themselves. So you're quite right there. Now, we will get on to the main topic, which I think most people will be expecting, which is your work in Indigenous communities, which you spent the better part of your life pursuing. You spent, you knew it was coming. It was inevitable.
I knew, but I just suddenly realised I've done an old political trick. I didn't answer your question.
No, you didn't. But
which I'll do very, very quickly do now, which is if you believe in climate change and you actually want to save the planet, then there's only one power that doesn't emit emissions, that goes 24/7, can power steelworks as well as electric power stations, as well as do residential power, as well as doing heavy industry and small industry power, and that was a nuclear. And I just find it strange that Australia has been so hijacked that we actually ban nuclear power in Australia. I think we're one of the only few countries in the world that do that. And we look at all the other countries like China and India and Europe, which especially the French and that, they run on nuclear power. And the United States and that, and Britain even still got nuclear power. So I just find it really strange about if you're talking the talk, but you're not walking the talk.
Yeah, well, let me ask you one of the difficult questions that I promised, which I didn't even write down, but let's go for it anyway. What do you think of people like Matt Keane with his policies, which are very much pro-renewables and severely anti-uranium, anti-nuclear? How do you go about fixing Australia's energy problems when the Liberal Party, who are, let's face it, the only party likely to engage in nuclear power, considering that the Labor Party has the Greens attached to them who will never allow it? What do you do when you know the Liberal Party won't ever pursue it with people like Keane, or do you think he's like a blip and that will finish and Liberal parties will turn back toward nuclear soon?
Oh, look, I have no doubt, and it is a global conversation now. You're looking at places like Germany, and they're believing in this fraud. Everyone believed that Germany was getting rid of nuclear power and getting rid of coal. But when you looked at the facts, the facts are that they did close down some coal-fired places and nuclear, but they're actually now ramping it all up again, and they've actually extended their coal-fired energy process a lot into the 2030 and 2050. So you're talking about emissions zero world by 2050. Well, it's going to be very difficult. And you look at and also we kid ourselves. I always talk about Denmark being 100% renewable. Well, the issue is that they live in a European grid, so they're living off French nuclear power and Polish coal, and so of course they can be able to sit and go, oh, look at us, we haven't got any coal-fired or nuclear stuff. In actual fact, they're living off it because they're living off this grid. And then you see gas, which I find another thing, because I've worked in the gas industry too, is, if you're talking about a transition process, gas is a major player, because again, it powers 24/7, and it is able to do heavy industry as well as residential. We seem to be living in this naive, foolish world. Anyone who's in the green movement and says they don't support nuclear and don't support gas as a transition process is living in a fool's paradise.
And there's a significant lack of education as well. Most of the Greens that I talk to online, the kids who are fully on board the renewables and they hate nuclear, have no idea they've been living near a nuclear power plant their whole lives in Sydney. Well, we've had two in Sydney, actually. They're quite shocked when they discover there's been one chopping away there quite happily their whole lives.
Yeah, about 50 years. I really find it strange too when they talk about nuclear waste as well. Of course, they think, we don't want a nuclear waste station in Australia. Well, I said, you're 50 years too late, because there are nuclear waste in the centre of Sydney. In fact, just about every hospital in Sydney and Melbourne and Perth and Adelaide and in rural Australia has got a nuclear waste in them. And we're trying to work out how to shift this stuff out into a safe area and that. And we're we're trapped by these Greens who say, no, we don't want to see this stuff transported and that. And also when they think about nuclear waste, they think of these huge repositories of waste coming out of nuclear power stations. It's just false. It's only tiny amounts, and the incredible brains, because I've been to world uranium conferences, these amazing physics and geoscientists. And this is the people I listen to about climate change, not environmental scientists. I listen to physics and I listen to scientists, because they look at things over 1,000 years or over 500 years. They can work things out, and they're actually they can say they can safeguard nuclear waste centres for 1,000 years. And they look at it because they look at it like Australia doesn't exist in 1,000 years' time. So how do we ensure that nuclear waste is protected without the existence of Australian nation? We could be splitting up into different countries, or we could be invaded, or we could do. So how do you make? And this is how they think, and this is how they come out with incredible ideas about how to do this. Also, they're now moving into the smaller power stations, that come out of nuclear submarines. So you can get in a nuclear submarine and go into sea for a year and still have oxygen pumping and still having power going and stuff like that. And that's been able then that you can have, packs that you set up against your factory, a large factory, and you can drive that stuff like. And also renewables. You talk about renewables. The nuclear power waste. You talk about it being around for 1,000 years or more. They've worked out by 2070 that they'll be able to reduce uranium mining because they'll be able to recycle this stuff.
Yes, well, there's also two things about nuclear waste that a lot of the Greens leave out when they're talking about it. The first is that it's the most heavily regulated waste from an energy process on the planet. It's also the only waste that is actually fully contained at an end use of life. So it's not being pumped out into the atmosphere. It's not being leached down to rivers. It is contained within the nuclear rods, which are then disposed of under heavy, heavy regulations. The second thing is that it's not actually dangerous to the survival of the planet. Radiation is not a planet killer. The globe is continuously bombarded with radiation. We dig it out of the ground, it comes into space, and it decays into an inert compound. So it's not a planet killer. So these people who think, you're going to end the world, you're not. Uranium waste is not going to destroy the planet. It doesn't even have the capability of doing so. But what is dangerous to the planet is when they're doing the renewables minings, there's quite a few renewables mining in the rare earth industry that goes on, which produces thousands of tons of sludge, radioactive sludge a minute, which does leach into waterways, which does get into the groundwater and into the crops. And that in Australia, we ship it back to, I think it's Singapore, we ship our radioactive sludge back. But in China, they just pour it into rivers. It's been destroying communities. I don't think anyone in the green movement realizes how much radioactiveness there is inside the renewables industry. It's not something that's just a function of the nuclear industry.
Yeah. Well, the people live. Look, they don't understand the science. So let's be quite frank about that. Radiation is everywhere, and me and you are sitting here currently at the moment being bombarded with radiation. You get in when I went to Beverly Mine and with other uranium mines. The only worry the person who only had to worry about being radiated was the pilot who flew us in, because they were being hit by more radiation waves than when you're walking around a mine site. And when you walk, it's just, and you go. I've been in a nuclear power stations, and I've been in a few around the world, and I can tell you they are very safe. They're very heavily regulated. That safety is the number one issue. They even planned, especially they've made changes, especially after 9/11. And if anyone can, and you see that out at Lucas Heights, they put these what they call the bird nest around them, and that, so that if a plane is hijacked and rammed into it, that it doesn't cause any nuclear accidents. These are lessons that were learnt out of 9/11, and they also learned out of Fukushima, where for a tsunami situation it caused some problems. But the issue was no one died from radioactive poison. No one died, and all the deaths that were done at Fukushima was people who were two groups. One was the people who sadly drowned in the tsunami, and the other group were people who had heart attacks and died when they were evacuated. There's a lot of false stuff being put out and around. You go to Chernobyl, you actually can go to Chernobyl, and it's like an animal reserve. You can go there and see the animals. That's one thing Chernobyl did, was prove the Simpsons and all these horror movies we see, like Godzilla and that you get these creatures and these monsters being created. Well, you go to Chernobyl, it doesn't. It's just become an amazing animal reserve.
Yes, well, the thing that Chernobyl taught all the scientists was that their predictions about how a worst-case nuclear meltdown would happen were mostly wrong. So although some people did die tragically, it was not the cataclysmic event that they thought it would be, and it did not persist for anywhere near as long as they thought it would. And in fact, humans suffered far worse than the environment did. The environment recovers very fast from radiation, primarily because for most of Earth's history, we've been exposed to far more radiation than we have right now. We're quite recent, whereas a lot of plant species, they're used to it. But that's a massive tangent that we could go in for forever, because nuclear energy is absolutely fascinating. So few people know anything about it. It
excites me, as you know, because I sat as on the uranium board, and also was co-chair of the Indigenous Uranium Committee. And you'll be very surprised about how many Aboriginal groups actually supported uranium. So I'm a bit of a nerd, I suppose, in this space, because I get turned on by it. Yeah.
Well, let's throw in a question that I was going to ask much later, but we'll throw it in now. Wouldn't it be a way forward for Aboriginal communities to both preserve the environment and to make some more money and business off the land to become more self-sufficient if Australia heavily invested in uranium and a nuclear future? Wouldn't that free up lots of space for the environment to recover, because we wouldn't be coating ourselves in solar panels and wind farms and killing all our birds for no reason? And also to allow the Indigenous communities to make deals with these mining companies, get jobs, and run some of these rural communities with a bit more energy and some very real future prospects.
Well, the Aboriginal communities have picked up on this very quickly. There's a myth that floats around in Sydney and Melbourne, and that Aboriginal people are against mining, which is not true. There's more than 6,000, nearly 7,000 Aboriginals actually work in the mining industry across a range of jobs, from cleaners, chefs, plant operators, miners, engineers, and even mine supervisors, and even Glencore, for instance, their chief operations officer is an Indigenous bloke from Western Australia. He's now a global executive within the mining industry. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that have come out of the mining industry for trust funds, for education, for a whole heap of different programs there. In fact, there's a reform that needs to be done in this area, because some of these huge funds, they're sitting on $600 million, and they've run very good in regarding to in more investments and making more money. But when you go into the Aboriginal communities who own that trust, you see people living in abject poverty. So there has to be a reform done there where the funds, you don't destroy the principle of the funds, but you're actually getting funds out there that are actually building people's lives within these communities rather than leaving them in poverty. But in other areas, you see, the mining industry puts in about $4 billion, just over $4 billion back into Aboriginal businesses and into Aboriginal communities. And they've made a huge difference in a lot of these areas, especially in the Pilbara and Kimberleys and up in the Cape and other places, where their jobs are being created. They're skilling their workers up, so they're becoming tradies, they're becoming plant operators, they're going to universities, there's used funds going into education and things like that. So there's a lot of Aboriginal communities who are acceptable to having mining on their land. And you're right, by having this approach of nuclear power and nuclear energy. And this is the other thing that people get caught up with. Probably a lot of people in my generation as well, because we grew up under the nuclear threat of the nuclear holocaust. We're not talking in Australia and in many countries of the world. We're not talking about weapons. We're talking about energy, which will be of benefit to improving people's lives, improving people's economic lifestyle, economic growth and prosperity, and using those monies to build health and education systems that they need and the infrastructures that they need. And a good example of, and the Greens like to go into these areas and try and cause problems. So, like you see some of the votes for mining, you get like 99 votes to 1 against. And then they'll find that one person and use that tactic, say, oh, this bloke's an elder. Aboriginal people don't like mining because it's elder bloke. Well, the other 99 elders have said, no, we want it. And so they have these massive campaigns in banks and in investment areas, and they try and stifle this stuff. One of the most bizarre things, again, if you're a true climate change believer, is this thing they chant, we want renewables, we don't want mining. Well, how are you going to build the wind farms and the solar panels without mining?
Yeah, well, let's be clear. Nuclear weapons and nuclear power are two very different technologies. Yes. That'd be like being afraid of your car because you don't want to be hit by some C4 exploding. They're not the same thing. They're not even the same technology. But my concern is, if the Australian mining community, both in coal and uranium, is doing so much for these Aboriginal communities, what happens when we off-sell all of our mining resources to China, who are doing the renewables mines? Because the main reason China, just for your viewers who might not know, China does the renewables mining because it's not that we don't have the resources, but it's a very dangerous and dirty sort of mining. It's open cut. It has terrible byproducts, and Australia wouldn't be able to keep its green UN little 5 stars if we started mining renewables. So we won't be able to do it. China will mine the renewables and they'll sell us back these wind turbines. But what happens to the Aboriginal communities when we shut down all of our coal mines and we shut down all of our uranium mines? Do those communities just get left to rot once that happens?
Well, we've seen that already. We've got 40 years experience of it in regard to Indigenous communities where mines have went through their life and they've stopped. And you look at those communities which were thriving communities with really strong infrastructure. Well, now the range of mines are closing and it's going into a rehabilitation stage. Those shops are closing. All that infrastructure is starting to close down, and you're going to see a reversal of those communities. And we've seen it across the country. You see where some mines and that have closed down, and those communities are really just reverted back 40 years.
Oh, that's absolutely terrible. I mean, you've spent most of your life fighting the problems of bureaucracy getting involved in Indigenous politics, where the money goes to the bureaucrats, not to the people. And on Truth Talking, I remember reading that you said that there was a report done where they admitted they don't really know how much money is being spent. They don't really know where it's going, and they don't know if it's producing any real results for communities. So are you worried that we are funding the bureaucracy and not the communities? And if so,
Well,
are we asking a corrupt and broken system to essentially investigate itself?
Well, that's a good question there. It's the look. You only have to look at the productivity reports that have been done over the last, for the last 15, 20 years, and it's all there in black and white. That most of the money does not even get out of the capital cities or out of the bureaucracy. It's very much bureaucratic, keeping the bureaucracy alive. Without and it's not focused on end results. Now, I come from the business community, and we're quite clear about what the end focus should be, and we work towards that, getting that focus, and we put up timelines, we put up what the actions are to reach that the end results, and we put up who's responsible for it, so we can kiss them or kick them, depending on that they've reached their targets and stuff. So that was common sense to me, and I was very much heavily involved in setting up the closing the gap, except for the targets, but because I sold it to the Labor government, that if you're really going to solve things, or why can't you have a target of eliminating eye disease within Aboriginal communities within 5 years, and then you just focus on that, and you just bang, bang, bang. The problem was the process. They got these targets, really business-like targets and time frame, and then they gave it to the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is more about process. And all we did was people processing. Then you said, why are you processing the way you're doing this? And they said, oh, because it makes us look busy. We're running around doing things. But we're not focusing on the result.
That's exactly what people have started to notice. I mean, particularly with the rise of identity politics, which is, I know it's been around for a while, but it's really come into its stride in the last 5 years. Do you find that identity politics has focused more on living off problems rather than solving them? Because most of what they seem to focus on, they shy away from real solutions to problems with Indigenous communities, like ensuring that the children are getting the education up to the same standard as white kids or city kids. The Aboriginals have one of the poorest attendance of school in the world, and you don't really hear about it from the identity politics groups. They're more interested in the activist slogans, changing dates, things, anything they can take to a protest march and get some Instagram photos on, they're happy. But do you feel that identity politics has it wants to live off the problems that face our Indigenous communities rather than solve them?
Well, it goes back quite a few years. When I was a young kid, there was this black conscious movement, which was all about blackness. They were considered fringe things, and they were almost laughed at within black communities. And it was a very socialist, communistic approach to things, and the evils of other people who oppress black people and stuff like that, and excused, like, oh, I'm poor because these evil white people were oppressing me, and therefore it's no good for me to get a job or get educated or anything like that, because it's irrelevant, because I'm just going to be still oppressed. Warren, you don't realise you're oppressed. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And they said, well, look in the mirror, for you will always be oppressed by white people. And I'm sitting there going, are you frigging kidding me?
Your Irishness oppresses you. I mean, we give the
Irish I've got more oppression there. I tell you.
That's it. Your Irishness is definitely it. That's where you're being oppressed.
Well, I was in Ireland in 2011, and I wanted to trace down where my grandfather's family come from. And I went down there, and I was sitting there talking to them, and they said, during the war, the Catholics versus the Protestants and that, William of Orange and that, we chose the wrong side. We chose the Catholic side.
Warren is back in high definition. It's my fault for giving him crap about being Irish, I'm pretty sure. Because you're oppressed for being Irish, right? We
I
were
know. Well, you're
having you
oppressed.
to go with Irish.
I reckon you deliberately cut me off there because you're a very oppressive person.
I am.
It's just
Well,
proving my point about critical race theory. But
well,
anyway, I
put it
just
this
find it
way.
totally
I
bizarre.
found out that my family did not tolerate Catholics because they were from the Protestants. So that's what it was. It wasn't the Irish, it was the Catholic part that got you cut off.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it is, mate. Gee, I've got an oppressed group across the board: Aboriginal, Irish, bloody Catholic. What next?
But you're a man, so I still outrank
yes, I'm
you.
a man too. Yes, yeah. I
I'm
could be accused
conservative
of
now.
being a white man as well because of my Irish background.
Half white, you're gone. There's no
Yeah.
oppression points left on your card.
Yes.
Wait, look, I was going to make a point about, do you think that perhaps, in particular Indigenous communities, I can't talk, that human rights might be being sacrificed in favor of politics? Because we see particularly that, for example, feminist groups won't touch Aboriginal cultures where women are being abused because they don't want to intersect with Indigenous politics. And we see actually kids getting left behind. So instead of the kid having an equal right to an education that a white kid will have in a city area, these kids are letting fall through the cracks because of their ethnicity. Now, do you find that there is this strange play between social politics and our basic fundamental rights as Australian citizens?
And you look at the statistics, you look at the CIS statistics that come out last week from Jacinta Price, and you looked at a few weeks earlier, which come out from Marcia Langton, even though Marcia is on the left, showing from Melbourne University, showing these similar statistics that if you're living in rural and remote Australia, you're an Aboriginal person, then you're the life expectancy between Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals in Australia is a lot lower. But when you put Aboriginals in cities with Aboriginals living in rural and remote Australia, it's even more lower. So you've got about a 10-year gap between Aboriginals living in rural and remote Australia compared to what Aboriginals are who live in the cities. And so you do have this disconnect from people who are living in cities and that about the life and what's happening in these communities. Prior to COVID, I used to spend about 3 days a week in rural remote Australia, going out into remote communities, going into rural communities and talking to people, Indigenous people and that, and you can just see the complete disconnect. You see the violence. It's 36 times an Aboriginal woman in a regional or remote community will experience domestic violence, sexual assault, and a whole lot of raft of other things. Can you imagine this? 36 times more likely. So you put that in a suburb in Sydney, there'd be an outroar. There'd be police put out there. There'd be a whole lot of things being done in regard to fixing that problem. The suicide rate, kids are 7 times more likely, kids as young as 8, 9 and 10 committing suicide. At that age, I was looking forward to a long life and a prosperous life. These kids just don't see any future and they're committing suicide. Sexual abuse of kids. It's just this raft of other things. And this thing about there's no jobs out there. Well, I've been to these communities. There are job opportunities out there. It's just that Aboriginal people don't fill those jobs, and that they do need to have private sector investment, and they do need to have Indigenous private commercial profitable businesses, small to medium, that can work in these communities and do a lot of difference. That's one thing I do give the federal government, is that this focus on business development and economic development is pretty strong, and has been very strong since 2013. But there's a lot more that needs to be done, and the important part, and this is why I'm disappointed with Ken White and his changing the closing the gap, where he dropped the target of school attendance. The problem we had, and this is when I was chair of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council, was that if 100 kids were in a community, 50 kids turned up on Monday and 50 kids turned up on Tuesday, were they the same kids? And we
Yeah,
didn't know. And we
well,
know that
education is the great liberator of society. If people are educated, then they can. If education is the great liberator of society, so if people are educated, then that next generation have the tools required to lift themselves out of poverty and to find
correct.
jobs. But it feels to me like the bushfire situation where we know, no matter how many reports we do, and we know what works. We know how to fix the problem. We did it with Western cultures. We know what we need to do with Aboriginal cultures to help them, and that's to ensure kids go to school, to ensure that the laws are enforced to protect women and children and also adult men as well. But we don't seem to want to, because that involves some difficult conversations with the social politics. And so instead we throw more money at bureaucracy, which keeps the activists happy, but doesn't actually help the people who most desperately need to be helped.
Yeah, and I've written articles about it. I've been to a lot of these communities. I did an article for the Australian called the Donkey-Proof Fence. Where they put these business managers in these communities. When you're thinking with a title like business managers, they're actually going to be looking at starting businesses. Well, it's almost like the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea. It's not a very democratic place. Well, these people had nothing to do with business. This guy had this genius idea of. Because he noticed there's a lot of donkeys wandering through the street. So he said, why don't we build a fence around the town? And so they spent money to build a fence around the town. But what they didn't do was the roads coming in and out of the town, they didn't put down grids, like those cow grids you see. So the donkeys just, instead of walking, because they stopped by the fence, they just walked down the road. And it never made any difference in the town and this is what these bureaucrats and people do. They come up with these genius ideas. And it just doesn't work, and it's also short term. Work was only there for the people to build the fence. They didn't have this concept about business sustainability and how you can do these things and how you can have small business operations. When I was in this place, I picked out 4 businesses that could have been set up in this small community. And no one really took it serious about kids attending school. People said the rhetoric, "Oh, we've got to get kids to school." Then we said, "Well, how come you only got 45% school attendance? How come you only got this and that?" And they said, "Oh, well, it's really hard." And I said, "Well, it's not really hard. All you got to do is work with the parents and get the kids to school." And that's why I thought
Heaven forbid you ever suggest building a boarding school where disadvantaged kids could go and get fed and have somewhere safe to sleep so they can get their education. I mean, heaven forbid anyone do anything productive, because then you'll be accused of stolen generation, rather than something that white kids and Western kids have access to, but you can't do it in Aboriginal communities.
And that's another one of the lies. They think that you get these kids being stolen and taken away, and they're losing their Aboriginality by going to these areas. Well, that's just a whole lot of crap. I'm the chair of the Australian Indigenous Education Foundation. We've got 1,000 kids going for that program. The parents and those kids, there's another 3,000 kids lining up to fill those positions. And they're not being forced to do it. They see an opportunity to get a good education, to be able to build a career for themselves and be able to buy a house, feed their families, and build a future for their kids who can build a future for their kids. And they're just lining up. So every position that we fill, we could have 3 other kids wanting to get into those programs. And those kids also have an influence on the school. So the schools have become very accommodating to their families and very accommodating to the kids in those schools with their culture and everything. So it's amazing what's happening. And so these people, they don't have a clue what they're talking about by saying, we want these kids to stay in these communities. Well, when you've got a community of 200 people, you can't get a high school in there. How are they going to get the smorgasbord of courses and programs that can help them to build their future for themselves and have an opportunity about getting jobs and building a business if they want to build a business? So I That's just propaganda. It's just nonsense. The statistics, in fact, there's been a lot of statistics done by the Productivity Commission and also by the large accounting firms, and it just doesn't stack up. The results of kids attending school in boarding school is like a 95% graduation rate. That's even bigger than the wider non-Aboriginal population graduation rate.
What these people do is they deny these Aboriginal children their right as individuals to an education and to a future by deliberately trapping them inside their old cultures and their remote areas. Because if those kids get ahead and make their own way, then the grievance politics are over for the activists. And it's just really sad because no one seems to care about the children involved and what their life is going to be like. I just find that really sad, but I just thought we'll get into some I'll challenge you now. I'll give you some difficult questions and we'll see how we go for a bit of fun. You can give a pass if you don't want to answer them, but we'll see. Exactly. I told you I was evil. One thing that was being talked about a lot now is that radical Marxism seems to be selling a lie, that only Aboriginal Australians can be truly Australian. And I suspect that Europeans could be here for 100,000 years and they'd still demonize colonial descendants as not being Australian. Do you find that's quite a toxic way to go about race relations in Australia, and that it's done more damage and set race relations back by this insistence that it's completely separate? You can't be Australian unless you are Aboriginal. And so all these people who've been here for 200 years are suddenly being disenfranchised from their own country.
Oh, it's just nonsense. Aboriginal people don't even think that. I'm talking in a general term. The vast majority of
yeah.
It's just these idiots who have been indoctrinated in these universities with this Marxist theory and stuff like that. Aboriginal people are very proud Australians. That you see them when they go. You see them all the time. They fought in wars when they didn't have full citizenship. Since going back over 100 years. My family and that fought in wars for this country and were proud to serve. There's whole heaps of Aboriginal people out there. You see all those 6,000 or 7,000 people working in the mining industry. They're very proud of being workers and providing for their families and being Australians. They're very, all these arguments. Like a few years ago, this argument's come up about Australia Day. I was actually in Kununurra working on my TV show, and all the media from Sydney rang me in Melbourne and said, what do Aboriginals think about this? And I said, well, I'm standing here with a whole lot of Aboriginals here. I'll hand over the phone to them. And I handed over the phone, and I said, what do you think about Australia Day? And they said, why? What's the problem? And that was
exactly.
What are you talking about? They had no clue. What are you talking about? And they said, oh, in Melbourne there's this big demonstration and that. And I said, oh, really?
Yeah, Melbourne's always been a bit weird. Usually the rest of the country just ignores what goes on in Melbourne. It's like Canberra. It's not really a thing.
They've become the protest capital of Australia, Melbourne. Anything that they could protest about, they'll just pull 1,000 people out. They go out and have barbecues. They go out and have fun. They love the public holiday just like anyone else. You see people doing even, welcome to countries at these Australia Day events. You see Aboriginals doing performances and dance and stuff at these. In fact, I used to be a very groovy dancer when I was a young bloke, and I used to some of these dances at these Australia Day events. Look. Aboriginal people, of course, we've got a good, bad, beautiful, and ugly history. In fact, name me a country in the world that doesn't. There's none that exists, and not every country's had a good birth. Australia had a better birth. We didn't have to go to a war to create our country. It was done, through the vote. It was done through people. And name me in the last 50 years since 1970. A law that was discriminating against Aboriginal people. Name me a law. There's none. People talk about Aboriginals getting the vote. Well, it was only Queensland and Western Australia that hung out, and that happened. And then it was the Menzies government all these lefties hate Menzies, a conservative right winger and that. Well, he was the guy that forced Queensland and Western Australia to come in line with the rest of Australia and give Aboriginals the full vote, and that was in 1962. And so this idea about the oppression and that. Yeah, of course, things happened badly in the past. Like the first 13 years of my life, I lived under the Aboriginal Protection Act, but we got rid of it, and we got rid of all those laws. In fact, I would argue since around the 1950s onwards, there's been this positive, as they call it, positive discrimination in helping Aboriginals get to school, in helping Aboriginals get an education, helping Aboriginals get into jobs, helping Aboriginals to get and run their own businesses, helping Aboriginals not get into jail. There's a whole lot of programs, and billions of dollars are being spent in these things. The only problem is that it's run by the bureaucracy that isn't focusing on outcomes. And this idea, in the last 15 years, the only time someone said to me, "What's it been like in the last 15 years?" And I said, "Have you been racially abused?" And I said, "Yes, I have." And I said, "Oh, that's terrible. Who did that?" And I said, "It's usually people on Twitter who have hashtag anti-racist, hashtag I'm a left winger or a socialist. They're the ones who have racially abused me. They've called me dreadful names. I won't say them here because you're such, you're
of course, I wouldn't let you do that here, but I know what you mean. And you raised a really interesting point, which is that, first of all, the reason Australia took a while to catch up on rights is because we'd only been around as a coherent legal entity as a nation for 200 years. And for the opening 100 of that, we had wars to deal with, and we were quite scattered. It's a massive nation, and we were trying to build it from scratch at the edge of the world in an era where we didn't have international travel and communication across oceans like we do now. So we were working pretty fast compared to what we had to deal with as a nation. It was amazing that we got this far.
Yeah, history is what it is. I always say history is what it is. It's not there to make you happy. It's not there to make you sad. It just is what it is. And I don't judge people on the past. I judge them on what they're doing today and what they're doing to move into the future and how they unite and work together. And I can tell you this: on that benchmark, Australia is doing a friggin' fantastic job. Are we perfect? Of course we're not perfect. We're human beings. Human beings make mistakes. Human beings are able to correct those mistakes and move on and do things and build stuff. And it's been, Australia has done a fantastic job. I argue with my American friends. I say, you always rave on about America being the greatest country in the world. I'll tell you what, Australia did amazing things working with its Indigenous people, has done amazing things working with the colonisers and other people who have come here, and especially with the migrants who have come here post Second World War, who worked so hard in the 50s and 60s and 70s to build this economy and get us decent coffee and decent food and doing it great.
Best coffee in the world. Australia has the best coffee in the world and the best tea, I might add.
We're coffee snobs. I saw a thing that said something you'd never hear an Australian say overseas. Gee, this is good coffee.
Exactly. That is true. I nearly died in North America. There was no coffee. But you raised a really great point, and that is when I'll let you go soon. But when Europeans land in Australia, it's on record as being the biggest clash of cultures that we have on record, where the time gap between the civilization was the greatest. It's at least 20,000 years, perhaps more. And to think that this nation started with an ancient civilization, a ragtag bunch of not only convicts, but very poor free settlers who had almost nothing. It's incredible how much we've managed to achieve in 200 years, that we are here together and we've built all these beautiful cities and a country based upon liberty and freedom. And we've been a very successful entity as the Australian people. And it worries me when I looked out last year and saw these activists tearing down statues and defacing memorials of the people who helped to build this country. I don't think that does anything for the coherency and the internal civil peace of a nation when you've got activists defacing the relics of Australia. I mean, what did you think when you saw that going down the street? Did you think, this is going to cause some problems?
Well, it's not uniting us. Aboriginals as Aboriginal people, we like to protect our heritage, and there's amazing rock carvings and rock paintings, and that go back thousands of years. Sydney Harbour's full of incredible ancient Aboriginal sites, and we protect them. We put them in national parks, and we do things, and we argue that case. But you can't argue that case when you're tearing down someone else's cultural assets and destroying them, and also I just find it bizarre about what you're going to we're going to tear down a statue of someone, and that automatically wipes history. It automatically makes a better world. We all start singing and dancing in the street with flowers in our hair and all this type of stuff. That is nonsense. That is just a divisive divide, and it splits us. Australians have, and I'm talking about all Australians here. We have of things that really unite us, and people are starting to notice. This is one of my fears too. We have this knockabout, take the piss out of each other and have fun and do things. And now, because of cancel culture, the woke people, and that you can't, we're losing that knockabout Aussie character, which all of us had. Aboriginal. The new migrants who come here, the people who were here before the colonisers, and we've got some great institutions in which we made our own. Yes, we've got the Westminster system, but we've also put in a bit of like the America. We have a Senate who represents the states. We have these elections. We've had incredible things that we've exported to the world, like the secret ballot. So people can't be beaten up, and when they've got to stand in a room and put their hands up, they can go into a little, the bit of paper and a pen, as my father-in-law says. Our democracy pens going behind into a little box, cardboard box, and using a pen, a pencil, and a bit of paper.
I think we should go back to that one with the way things are going in the US. I think we'd be a lot better off if we had pens, papers, and stamps on our hands to say you've been here, you can't come back and vote again.
I like that idea of what Indians do, where they actually put an ink spot on your thumb. Yeah.
I'd rather have that than the problems that the US has got right now. I've got 3 more quick questions for you, and then I'll let you go. 2 of them are hard. The first one is, do you have a favourite Aboriginal religion that you subscribe to, or do you subscribe to any Aboriginal religions or stories that you want to quickly spell out?
Look, I love the Gumigara. The Gumigara story is from Western Bundjalung, and I'll put up my wedding ring because it's on my wedding ring. There it is.
Wow.
And it's an Aboriginal designer designed it. My wife has the female side of that story. What the Gumigara is, a ceremony where Aboriginals of Western Bundjalung country travelled to the east, to Gowenna Headland, Evans Head, and we had ceremonies there where you met your future spouse, and you went off.
Lovely.
And it's a great ceremony. So that's what's that story is on my on my wedding ring. It's on my wife's wedding ring, and it's lovely. It's lovely story about
that's what we don't hear enough about. We don't hear enough about these great cultural experiences and stories. I find that's just missing from today's discussion.
Yeah.
Now, my really hard question, which I thought, why not try it on one? Mundine sounds pretty keen. What do you think of the hunting? What do you think of the hunting of endangered species by remote Indigenous communities? Things like the dugong and the sea turtles, where they're not being hunted by canoes, they're being hunted in pinnies, runabouts. Do you think that should be allowed, or if something's endangered, is it endangered for everyone, the same rules for everybody?
Can I say something that isn't culturally correct here?
Sure.
The dugong is a very sacred animal to the Torres Strait Islanders, and they use it in ceremony, and they use it in food. And every time you go there, they give it to you as a welcoming thing. I'll be quite honest. It tastes like chewing rubber. The fact of the matter is, we know how we got to this area where endangered species are. We need to protect those endangered species.
and we need to look after them, because if you talk like dugong, if you're talking about that as a sacred animal, which is part of your ceremonial stuff, if you keep on killing it when it's endangered, then what's going to happen is that you're not going to have a sacred animal, and you're not going to have these ceremonies going into the future. So you must protect it, and that's what we need to do.
I'm glad that you've been able to join us today. I have got a fun question that we always finish with on Curtain Call, which is, if you could have dinner with anybody in history, alive or dead, who would it be and what would you ask them?
I'd actually like to sit down with Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King, because these two people suffered under racial oppression, and yet after they got released, they were able to sit down and have dinner with, Nelson Mandela used to sit down and have dinner with his jailers, and that reconciliation, that forgiveness, I'd like to understand that, and I'd love to have that conversation about it, and also Martin Luther King's. I love to have my children judged by the character, not by the colour of their skin. I just love to have that, a cup of tea and a bit of food, and go from there.
And a good cup of coffee, Australian coffee.
Yeah, good Australian coffee, of course, yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Warren. It was a fascinating discussion, and you have a lovely afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll catch you later.
Thank you for joining us on Curtain Call. We are hosted by The Good Source, the home of conservative and libertarian voices. Help us fight fake news by following us online. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and all good podcasting services. If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe.